I'm going to be reading one last time in Joshua chapter 14, and I hope you have a Bible and will follow along as we read from the Word, Joshua chapter 14. And I want to start reading at verse 6. Joshua 14 and verse 6. Then the sons of Judah drew near to Joshua in Gilgal, and Caleb the son of Jephunneh the Kenizzite said to him, "You know the word which the Lord spoke to Moses, the man of God, concerning you and me in Kadesh Barnea. I was 40 years old when Moses, the servant of the Lord, sent me from Kadesh Barnea to spy out the land, and I brought back word to him as it was in my heart. Nevertheless, my brethren who went up with me made the heart of the people melt with fear, but I followed the Lord my God fully. So Moses swore on that day, saying, Surely the land on which your foot has trodden shall be an inheritance to you and to your children forever, because you have followed the Lord my God fully." Now, if you can picture in your mind one of those Bible maps, you might have one in the back of your Bible that shows Palestine with all of the 12 tribes apportioned. That's what's going on here. They've conquered the land. They've driven out all those nations, and now it's time for the people of God to settle in the land sworn to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And so each is coming to Joshua, and he's apportioning them throughout the land. And here in this reading, it's the tribe of Judah. And Caleb is their spokesman, and he's wanting a particular plot of land for he and his household. Now, if I were to ask you tonight to name the 2 spies out of 12 who brought back a good report after 40 days of spying out the land, name those 2 spies, you would most likely say, in this order, Joshua and Caleb. And it makes sense. Joshua, that's the book we just read out of. He's got the name on the book. He was the successor of Moses to lead and shepherd the nation of Israel. He was the general who led the conquests to conquer the land. And so Joshua is usually mentioned first. But tonight I want us to consider his fellow spy, who's often overshadowed. In particular, do I want us to notice a phrase that is used about Caleb 6 times in the Old Testament. I love it when the scriptures describe a person in a unique way in which nobody else in the Bible is described. For instance, Abraham, 3 times is called the friend of God. That doesn't mean God didn't have any other friends besides Abraham. It just meant Abraham best exemplified the kind of friend that God wants. David, the man after God's own heart, twice mentioned because he best exemplified that the person who wanted to pursue God's heart and make his heart his own. But the phrase that is attributed to Caleb that we see in our reading, did you notice it? He followed the Lord fully. Isn't that interesting? It doesn't just say he followed the Lord, his God, but 6 times to say he followed the Lord fully. Well, what does that mean? And what does that say about Caleb? Why would he describe him that way? We know what it means when your cell phone is fully charged. We know what it means when the kids are fully dressed. We know what it means when the Death Star is fully operational. We know what that means. But what does it mean to follow the Lord fully? And how can we, as we wage this warfare, follow him who followed the Lord fully? Now, I'm going to give you all my points up front. And I do that so that you'll have hope as we get close to the end. You'll know we're almost finished. Just got one more to go. But I want you to think about that phrase with me tonight, following the Lord fully, because it's going to require these three things. Number one, vision. Number two, devotion. And number three, completion. When you think about Caleb, you're going to think about those three words as he followed the Lord fully. Vision means the way you see things, the way the perspective you have in the difficulties that come your way. Because Caleb was one of 12 spies sent into the land, and they were to look for three things. They were going to spend 40 days in the land, one man from each tribe, and they were specifically to look for the fruit of the land. Is it really a land flowing with milk and honey? That's how it was described. Is that true? Second, what are the cities like? Are they open or are they fortified and strong? And third, the people. Are they few or many? And so these men went and spent 40 days spying out the land. Now let's keep your place here if you have a ribbon marker or a bookmark and go back to Numbers chapter 13. Numbers chapter 13, and I want you to notice the report that all 12 spies gave. Numbers chapter 13, verse 25. Numbers 13 and verse 25. When they returned from spying out the land at the end of 40 days, they proceeded to come to Moses and Aaron and to all the congregation of the sons of Israel in the wilderness of Paran at Kadesh. And they brought back word to them and to all the congregation and showed them the fruit of the land. Now, the best way I ever saw this described for a kid's Bible class is the teacher made a broomstick and blew up purple balloons and put it on each ends and had the kids carry around the fruit of the land. That's how big the fruit was that the Israelites found. It was a land flowing with milk and honey. And so verse 27, they told them and said, "We went into the land where you sent us, and it certainly does flow with milk and honey. And this is the fruit. Nevertheless, the people who live in the land are strong, and the cities are fortified and very large. And moreover, we saw the descendants of Anak there. Amalek is living in the land of the Negev, and the Hittites and the Jebusites and the Amorites are living in the hill country, and the Canaanites are living by the sea and by the side of the Jordan." And I want you to appreciate that they all agreed on that. They all saw the same thing. Not only was the fruit large, the cities were strong and fortified. And the people, I mean the Amorites and the Jebusites and the Hittites and the termites, all these people, you wouldn't believe it if you saw. And Caleb and Joshua did not disagree. Yes, the cities are strong. The people are huge. But I want you to notice who the spokesman was for the minority in verse 30. Then Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, "We should by all means go up and take possession of it, for we shall surely overcome it." God will cause us to prevail. God will bring victory. We will overcome it. What was the difference? Perspective. Aren't you tired of seeing your problems from the ground up? You know what we need to start doing? Seeing it from the throne of God down. Seeing it from heaven's point of view. And that's what following the Lord fully is we know, yes, the devil is powerful, and yes, the difficulties and storms of life are strong, but we shall surely overcome it. God is with us. He's fighting for us. He's on our side. Do you think it's impossible for you to live as a Christian? You better change your perspective. You think it's impossible for you to make your marriage work? You better start seeing like God does. What was it that caused David to go literally fight his giant? He said, "The God who delivered me from the paw of the bear or the lion will surely deliver me from the hand of this uncircumcised Philistine." He didn't say, "Oh, Goliath's not that big. I've seen bigger." No, but he's not as big as God. We won't follow the Lord fully until we change our vision and see things from God's perspective. Even when all the congregation threatened to stone Joshua and Caleb, they continued to see from God's vision. Follow the Lord fully. That's going to take seeing things differently than perhaps the way you see them now. Secondly, it's going to require a devotion not to people, but to God. A devotion to God, to follow Him fully. Caleb was chosen from the tribe of Judah to represent them among the 12 spies. If you look back, you're still here in Numbers, look back at Numbers chapter 1 and verse 27. Here the men of Judah are numbered. That's those who are 20 years old and up. Numbers 1 and verse 27, 74,600. So out of 74,600 men, they chose Caleb to be their representative. Think about that. If you were applying for a job and they said, "We're taking 74,600 applications and we'll take one," would you sit by your phone and wait? So Caleb may not have been one in a million, but he was one in 74,600. And I remember trying to get a perspective just on that number, wrap my mind around how special Caleb was. And for a while, when our kids were young, we used to get a report from them every week about how many people older than us had better phones than we did. You know, they were noticing that because at the time I still had an old flip phone. That was all I needed it to do. And so I took out my flip phone and the calculator and I did 1 divided by 74,600 equals. And it said out of range. Couldn't do it. But that's Caleb. But do you know who else that is? That's the spies who came from Naphtali, Gad, Asher, Reuben, Simeon. They were all rulers, chieftains. They were men who were leaders among their tribes. And so don't think for a moment that when Joshua and Caleb took their stand, that somehow they were standing up against the immoral reprobates and the riffraff of Israel. No, they were standing up against respected men, outnumbered 5-1. You think you might tempted to at least be silent? If they weren't devoted to what are they gonna think about us? They were devoted to following God fully, even when it was unpopular to do so. There must come a time when we care less and ultimately not at all what people in the world think of us. Now, I can remember a time in my life where that paralyzed me. That's all I could think about. What are they thinking about what I wear and how I talk and where I go and where I won't go? What do other people think about that? And sadly, that's how I made decisions. But our devotion is not to people. You follow the Lord fully because you're devoted to Him. In fact, your version might not even say follow the Lord fully. It might say follow the Lord wholly or wholeheartedly, which is exactly the word used to describe what happened to Solomon in 1 Kings 11 and verse 4 when he had all those wives and concubines. Remember, the text says his heart was not wholly devoted to the Lord. And those wives led him away. Devotion. It's the difference between Jesus when he was arrested and Peter, remember it said, followed him at a distance. Still want to just barely see what's happening, still curious enough to know where this goes, but far enough back where I can say, nope, not with me. One of my cousins a few years ago asked if I would do their wedding ceremony, and I was honored to do it. And she said, now it's going to be a country wedding, and all the members of the wedding party are going to be wearing boots. And I said, well, I want to match. I want to be a part. So I'll go get me a new pair of dress boots. So I did. I went down to Cavender's Boot City in Pasadena. And I went in there and started looking around, and they had all these weird colors, and I thought, there's no way I can wear these. And mercifully, one of the workers came over and he said, sir, are you buying these for yourself? Which I thought was an odd question. I said, yes, I'm a preacher. I'm going to be in this wedding and I want some new dress boots. And he said, okay, well, he said, let's come out of the ladies section. We'll go over here. I didn't fit in there. And it was obvious that I didn't fit there. What are we going to do when we feel that in the world, where it's obvious to other people? I don't fit. It may require you to make an unpopular stand. You devoted to God enough to do that? Now, sometimes this may be in the world where we're the only one and we're standing up against those in the world. And Paul said, I stood alone and God was with me, and that was enough in 2 Timothy 4. No one stood with me, he said, but the Lord was with me. But what about when it's among other spiritual people like it was for Caleb? What if it's in your own family and it's you who has to stand up and say, we shouldn't be watching this. We shouldn't be talking about this. This is gossip. Are you devoted to God that much that you would take that stand? Or what about if it's in this own assembly and say, we don't have authority for this? We don't have book, chapter, and verse. We can be so devoted to what God thinks that we care more about that than what others think. It's how you follow the Lord fully. It's your vision, your devotion, and then finally, completion. So think of following the Lord fully as in all the way to completion, to the end. And that's what Caleb did. Now, because of the Israelites' lack of faith, they listened to the 10 tribes, 10 spies instead of Joshua and Caleb. God caused them to wander in the wilderness for 40 years. So 1 year for every day that the spies were in the land. 40 years until that whole generation perished. And God said, I'll lead your children into the land. And so for 40 years, Caleb wandered in the wilderness. He had taken the stand for what was right, but still he had to wander, he and Joshua, for 40 years. Until finally we come back to where we began in Joshua 14. So 40 years in the wilderness, 5 years conquering the land, and now they're back to where they started. And I want to pick our reading back up at verse 11 of Joshua 14. Verse 10. And now behold, the Lord has let me live just as he spoke these 45 years. From the time that the Lord spoke this word to Moses, when Israel walked in the wilderness, and now behold, I am 85 years old today. I am still as strong today as I was in the day Moses sent me. As my strength was then, so my strength is now, for war and for going out and coming in. Now then, give me this hill country about which the Lord spoke on that day. For you have heard on that day that Anakim were there, with great fortified cities. Perhaps the Lord will be with me, and I shall drive them out, as the Lord has spoken. First of all, after 45 years, they say, okay, send us a representative from your tribe, and we'll apportion out the land. And 45 years later, the people of Judah get together, and guess who they run out there as their representative? Caleb's still their man. And Caleb says, I've put up with a lot over the last 45 years. It wasn't my fault that we went into the wilderness. So I think I've earned a garden and a hammock, and just let me go into retirement, and all these young guys, they can go out and fight. We would play street football growing up. We would be on defense and come to the line of scrimmage, and somebody would yell, "Man up." And that meant you look across to the other team and pick the one you think you can keep up with and play defense. And so everybody would start calling out who they got. I'd say, I'd take the girl with the broken arm over here. I got her, boy. 85-year-old Caleb said, I got the Giants. They're mine. Should have driven them out 45 years ago, but I'm ready to go complete what we started all those years. Follow the Lord fully. Bring it to its completion. How many have you known who started in the Lord's army, but no longer fight for him? Who are no longer engaged in battle as a soldier of Christ? What happened? They didn't finish what they started. They didn't follow fully. What good does it do to start and not finish? That's why Paul said in 2 Timothy chapter 4, probably his last epistle as he wrote to the young preacher, 2 Timothy chapter 4, the time of my departure has come. What does he say in verse 7? I have fought the good fight. He did not say, I won every battle. I was undefeated. But I fought. I kept fighting. He said, I have finished the course. He did not say, I never took a detour to the right or left. But I kept correcting the course until I finished. I have kept the faith. He did not say, I never entertained any doubts. Never at one time wondered, is worth it. But I kept fighting. And I kept holding on to what I knew. Therefore, in the future there is laid up for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award to me on that day. And not only to me, but also to all who have loved his appearing, to all who follow the Lord fully. It's the crown that John said is for those who are faithful until death. Not faithful when it's easy, not faithful when it's convenient, not faithful when you feel like it. Faithful to completion. Follow the Lord fully. No one has ever called me by my real name, save for a 6th grade English teacher who said that Bubba was not a proper name. It's named after my father, Gerald Edward Garner, Jr. And I never did thought that name fit me. So on the first day of school, you know the drill, the teacher's going down the roll, and they would always say, now, if you go by another name, let me know. I can write that in the roll book. And so she would get to Gerald Garner, and I'd have to raise my hand and say Bubba, and everybody would laugh. But you know, there's coming a day when the book's going to be open and the roll's going to be called. I don't care what name is written. It won't matter. If the Lord should decide to say, well done, Gerald, or well done, Bubba, I just want him to know my name. Because do you know what the alternative is? Depart. I never knew you. You ready to follow him, who followed the Lord fully? Change the way you look. Be devoted to him over devotion to people. And don't stop until you've finished what you started. It may be that the first step is to come and confess your faith before this assembly. I believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. And based on your confession and repenting of your sins, you can be baptized tonight. You can join the army of the living God, and you can begin fighting for him and his cause. If you've wandered from the path and you've become discouraged and you need the help of your fellow soldier, we're not finished yet. Don't quit. Come and get what you need through the gospel and through the strength of your brothers and sisters. But let it be known right now, just come to the front while we stand up and while we sing.